It's Monday, May 5th. This is an end of the day SPY recap, and I'm shooting this video to kind of go over what happened today, but also to kind of respond to a comment I saw on one of my videos a couple of days ago asking if I would kind of do end of the day recaps or kind of before the open analysis, and to kind of show how I might have a bias in the market. And essentially, I do the same thing every day in terms of looking at the multiple time frames and seeing what they're telling me, and then I see how price opens to relative to the pre-market range, how that first 15-minute bar forms. So I certainly have a bias and expectations, but I also know that those can change pretty quickly. I want to see if price action conforms to those biases or not, and that gives me a clue as to kind of what might be unfolding. I'm doing a lot of what if analysis, so it's not like I really I might have a strong bias or expectation, but it doesn't mean price necessarily has to do what I'm thinking. And if it does, great, then that sort of gives me high probability to take certain trades. And if it doesn't, then I kind of have to analyze what does that mean for any conditions that might be changing. So I thought I'd just highlight a couple of the things I look at each day. I really do the same thing over and over again. I've shot a lot of videos on this on the playlist that you can look at how it all comes together. But for example, and I'll highlight just some of the key points about the way at least my mind works in terms of having expectations. Today, coming into the day, first of all, if we go to the monthly, I always look at the monthly and weekly charts as the big picture. So we had a big hammer bar from last month. I kind of expected that to be a little bit of a reversal, look to, and test back to the upside. But I do see on the monthly chart here, we have a little gap between the low of this bar and high of that bar. So I could see the market potentially only following through a little bit, but not necessarily going all the way to this target up here. But the thing is, on this 2-up month we have now, it's early in the month. So that's kind of important. I have a lot of time to work all the way. If it wants to really reach its target up here, which that's the next target to the upside on a 2-up bar, it has plenty of time to do it. And I know as long as we stay above the open, which is this red line, green, I'm going to stay biased to the upside overall. So that means, on certain days, you're going to get nice, good, strong opens to the upside. It might mean you get some failures moving lower that then you get very excited for moves back to the upside along with the green bar that's still in force. So that's the type of thing I'm always thinking about. Then the weekly chart, you had a nice green week from last week, and I'm therefore expecting that high to be, this kind of bar looks pretty comfortable that you're going to test the highs of that week. And today we haven't done it yet to start out. So that's kind of exciting to me that, I know we still have room for the, early in the week to kind of hit that high. And, you want to see it kind of hold the midpoint of that bar. Like this, was a green week last week, 2 weeks ago. We held that midpoint and we made it higher high. I kind of am looking for the same type of thing. That's my bias coming into the week. I also know, then I go to the daily chart and I want to see how that, the kind of an X-ray view of the weekly chart. And I knew we had this big green bar. That was very important to me, and I've kept that in mind for a while. So that affects my bias and expectations. I saw this as a big potential trading range. So for a few weeks, we had selling near the highs, buying near the lows of this big green bar. But then this was a key little area I was talking about last week, and we broke through it to the upside. So now, that's what kind of confirms that, or again, keeps my expectations that we're going to kind of move to the top of this megaphone overall. Lower lows here. Now that we broke through our trading range, we're working towards higher highs up in this area. And the first stop was kind of that high on, that we touched it on Friday, this little pivot. And that's why it, makes sense to pause there along the way. So to me, we have a nice day today. That's a 2-down day. That took out the low of the previous day, didn't really follow through. And that sets up very nicely now for trades to the upside. And today was a trade to the upside too, but because we started below the low of the previous day, I know that, and I guess I'll look at this now. I always see what happens. I put the blue lines, the pre-market range. I want to see how price first 15-minute bar opens relative to that range, relative to the midpoint of the prior day. So in this case, we're below the midpoint of the prior day, almost near the low of the previous day, but but immediately, we kind of hold for 2 bars and break out on bar 3. So there's sort of a buy signal intraday structure-wise that's below the midpoint of the prior day in an overall up environment. The question is, do I want to take that trade? If I do, I know that what has to unfold, this is the what-if analysis. We got to get through the midpoint of the prior day, and that could lead to the, moving to the high of the prior day, that green bar from yesterday. But that's, 3 bars are a little tricky in terms of, are they really going to unfold? A lot of times, that very first move takes out the low of the previous day, and then a big bar comes up close to the midpoint, and you kind of know you have plenty of time in the day to get to those highs. In this case, we paused for a couple of bars, had a kind of a narrow breakout way below the midpoint of the prior day. So again, buying this today, which was the only thing to consider structure-wise, you also knew that it was going to take a lot to get to the high of the previous day. And that's why once you got one push up, a little pause, second push up, not surprising, that's kind of generally all you got on the day. And then by the end of the day, you get a little bit of a red failure. So, it's not like there was a big secondary move to the upside. It was just kind of opening price action, kind of in line with the big picture expectation, but a little bit in conflict in terms of the shorter, very short term, because we gapped down a little bit today. But I think overall, the failures to the downside here, on the overall uptrend are the good, setting up good opportunities to the upside. So now for the rest of the week, I'll be very, I'm definitely anticipating moving higher. And I want to see if price action tomorrow can be above the midpoint of this bar and go above the, the pre-market range and start higher towards some of those targets. Definitely taking out the highs of the previous week. So that's not changing until I see some kind of failure on the weekly chart that we're going to take out the high this week. It's just a question of how we're going to get there. So today, again, not necessarily the easiest day in terms of knowing how the week's going to start out once you gap down, but we did, try to head higher. And again, just given the structure on the day, not surprising that it just became a day where, it moved to kind of the close of yesterday. The little sell-off at the end doesn't mean anything to me relative to this whole context. So just thought I'd shoot that video here, highlight a few things, but, it always changes. It's always kind of what if happens. If this happens, then this is, changing this on the daily chart and changing this on the weekly chart. And I kind of know what has to happen. And when you kind of do this each day, you get a feel for what's developing, and you certainly get a feel for if your expectations are being met, or if something that doesn't meet your expectations, is it a very significant change, or is it something where it's just pausing and eventually you're going to get exactly the bias you're looking for? So right now, I'll just conclude this video by saying, still biased to the upside here overall. I like the way today was kind of a 2-down failure to reach this target down here. That sets up very nice trade to the upside, but I don't know what's going to happen overnight, and even though it's an expectation and a bias, it doesn't mean I can't get a nice down day tomorrow and try to trade it. And if I do trade the downside, let's say something happens below the midpoint of this bar and heads lower, and I kind of see a target down here to this area, I still know that we still have to really get below the midpoint of this weekly bar for it to mean anything. And I also know at any moment this early in the week still it could reverse to the upside. So if things open lower, I'm aware of that. And if things open higher, then I'm kind of excited because it's in line with really what I'm looking for. So that's about it, and we'll see what happens for the rest of the week. But a lot of it depends on, looking at the 3 time frames together, seeing where you are in that time frame, early or late into it, and then kind of anticipating what has to happen, the next day relative to what you're thinking is happening in the bigger picture. And all that, always to me relates to the pre-market range and then how that first bar opens relative to that range. And again, there's a lot of videos on my playlist that describe just my overall game plan on how I look at intraday structure. So it's, again, how that structure relates to some of that context that I have in mind on the 3 time frames.